killed, but some passengers were trapped in their seats for hours.
Other passengers managed to make their way out of the plane and wade through waist-deep snow to the terminal. Some said it was half an hour before emergency rescue crews arrived at the scene. And it's led to questions about federal government downsizing that has cut staff at small airports all over the country, including the one here in Charlottetown. More on that in a moment, but first, here's Neil Stairs in Fredericton.
After you see that was finally plowed in.
By late afternoon, investigators were ready to open the accident site to limited public view and suggest the broad outlines of what happened just before midnight last night.
Radio staff 39+3 is off at the same.
The Air Canada twin-engined regional jet was completing a Toronto to Fredericton direct flight when it apparently skidded off the runway, plowed its way up a snow-covered hill, and slammed into a stand of trees. The jet's landing gear was sheared off during the slide, and several of the trees punctured the passenger compartment. A number of people were pinned to their seats and had to be pried out of the aircraft. However, none of the 9 people who were taken to hospital had any life-threatening injuries, and only 4 of them remain in hospital.
Those 4 patients all have orthopedic injuries, fractures and things like that. We have called an all clear on our Code Orange, which is an external disaster, and operations are back to normal.
There was heavy fog in the area at the time of the accident, and that is being held partly accountable for the length of time it took to locate the downed plane. 2 airport crash team members responded immediately, but it was some time before they located a passenger who had climbed out of the plane and made his way through waist-high snow to a runway. This morning, survivors were telling their stories and expressing relief.
Well, we waited about 15 to 20 minutes, about 20 of us, and for some reason the engines stayed at a high thrust. I couldn't understand. I figured maybe the pilots were knocked out or died. And nobody put the engines down. Couldn't understand that.
Okay, 8 Fredericton Radio.
By daylight, the accident investigation experts had the site secured, but they weren't saying much.
At this stage, I'm concentrating mainly on taking measurements and documenting marks on the runway. I just come over, had a quick look at the aircraft. I'm on my way back into the EEC to meet with Air Canada representatives and also contact my superiors in our head office.
People here will want to know more than just what happened last night. There are questions about why it took so long to get rescue gear aboard the plane and whether things might have gone smoother if there had been more people on duty when Air Canada 646 touched down. Neil Stairs, CBC News, Fredericton.
Charlottetown's airport went through many of the same cutbacks as the one in Fredericton. There have been no air traffic controllers in the towers here since 1995. But as Ian Petrie reports tonight, that doesn't mean there's no one watching the planes.
Charlottetown's airport always looks a little big for the size of the community it serves. When the new airport opened in 1986, it had all the bells and whistles of other international airports in the country. But 3 years ago, the government started cutting spending here and at other Canadian airports. One cut privatized the air traffic control system, moving all controllers out of small regional airports like Charlottetown and Fredericton. But that doesn't mean there isn't anyone working in the big tower.
Nova 845, Charlottetown.
Yes, ma'am, we're 24 miles.
Vicki Smith is one of 6 people who maintain 24-hour-a-day service in the tower. She's a flight services coordinator.
Charlottetown Radio, Nova's 845, good afternoon.
Nova 845, Charlottetown Radio, good afternoon, go ahead.
Yeah, we're at a 10,000.
Air traffic controllers in Moncton are in charge of PEI-bound flights until 5 miles before Charlottetown. Only one plane at a time is allowed into the 5-mile radius around the city, and each deals with flight services here on landings and takeoffs.
27, roger.
Like Fredericton, pilots here use electronic navigation equipment to guide them onto the runway. But everything, including snowplow equipment, can't move without the okay of flight services. As the investigation continues in Fredericton, there will be answers as to why the plane ended up in the woods. But the question of why it took airport personnel so long to realize that there was an accident, well, there must be an answer to that as well. No one in Charlottetown was allowed to be interviewed. But a spokesman in Moncton said the Fredericton Flight Services coordinator acted within minutes of the crash to call for rescue support. Jacques Chamberlain says an air traffic controller could have not done any more. No one can guarantee there won't be an accident, but airport officials say even with cutbacks and changes at smaller airports, someone is watching landings and takeoffs. Ian Petrie, CBC News, Charlottetown.
Some confusion today at the Atlantic Police Academy in Summerside.
Walked away from the wreckage, others have to be pried from it. All are lucky to be alive tonight. 42 people were on a regularly scheduled commuter flight about this time last night. They took off from Toronto, their destination, Fredericton. But when Air Canada Flight 646 finally came to rest, it was in a forest about a kilometre from Fredericton's airport terminal, an airport with no air traffic controllers, and according to some, ill-equipped to handle a disaster. We begin our coverage in Fredericton. Here's Cass Rusey.
Pieces of Flight 646 lay scattered on a snowy field at the Fredericton Airport. All day, a team of 15 investigators sifted through the area where the Air Canada jet, carrying 42 passengers and crew, crash-landed in heavy fog last night.
I'm surprised at how structurally sound that aircraft is. No big twisting, it didn't break in two. It looks like it's very solidly built aircraft.
It was supposed to be a routine flight from Toronto. It was dark and the airport was shrouded in fog when the plane came in for a landing. The runway had just been sanded, but it was still slippery. The plane skidded off the runway, bouncing and moving wildly in an arc across a snowy field, losing its nose gear and landing gear along the way. It slowed down as it reached the top of a hill, then stopped altogether when it slammed, nose first, into a thicket of trees and bush. Just to show you how far the airplane slid on its belly, that's the Fredericton Airport terminal. That's about 1 kilometer away. The plane slid up this snowy embankment to those trees. The impact of the crash was so great, a thick tree actually punctured the top of the aircraft, miraculously missing any passengers inside.
Shake our heads in amazement that there were no very serious injuries or death in this occurrence.
Eric Simmons was a passenger on the plane coming home for the holidays. He escaped by sliding down the aircraft's wing and waiting for help.
Well, we waited about 15 to 20 minutes, about 20 of us. And for some reason, the engines stayed at a high thrust. I couldn't understand. I figured maybe the pilots were knocked out or died.
The Fredericton Airport has no air traffic controllers. They were phased out 2 years ago and replaced by flight services specialists. They provide air traffic and weather information to pilots, but they can't okay landings and takeoffs. It was 11:47 local time when the lone flight service specialist had his last contact with Flight 646. 3 to 5 minutes pass and still no sign of the plane. He alerts New Brunswick's only traffic control tower in Moncton. He then calls 911 and the 2 firefighters on duty at the airport. Air Canada officials say the jet had a clean maintenance record. It received a service check just yesterday. The recorder from Flight 646 has been sent to Ottawa for analysis, and investigators say it could take up to 1 year before they can determine what happened here. Cass Rusey, CBC News, Fredericton.
Investigators aren't the only ones looking for answers tonight. Some passengers complained they weren't just fighting fear in the darkness of a broken airplane, they were also fighting to rescue themselves. With their story, here's the CBC's Susan Harada.
Chaos. That's the word some passengers used to describe last night. There was confusion, cold. In the end, the lights through the fog that meant help had finally arrived. In the seconds before impact, Flight 646 was like any other. Tom Walt.
I was about 3 rows behind the exits, the emergency exits there, and just reading a magazine, and they said we were coming in for a landing, so they made sure everybody was buckled and everything.
Allison Vaughn.
I was actually really tired because I traveled 18 hours and I was sleeping on the plane, and I woke up to what I thought was turbulence, and we were crashing.
Eric Simmons.
I thought it was going to flip over. And then, with the fumes and the smoke, I thought it was going to catch a fire.
Miraculously, and that's another word they all use, there was no fire. There was, at first, some panic.
People started screaming in the back and all over the place. A few were doing the old, out loud praying type of thing.
The man behind me actually was very helpful. He said, "Everyone calm down, it's going to be okay." He got the fire extinguisher and he let us out.
I did get the exit open, got a few people out. And then a few people wanted to go back in, I wouldn't let them, because I thought it was going to catch fire.
While the passengers were struggling to get free of the wreckage, struggling injured and disoriented through waist-deep snow in the woods, emergency services were struggling through the fog looking for the plane. It's not clear how long that took. Transport Canada says it was 15 minutes.
We were just all sort of making a group decision. Should we walk forward or what should we do? And about 16 of us walked through the snow.
It was snow, very deep, everything else. They actually had to bring front-end loaders out just to clear a path for us to walk out.
Nobody should have had to walk, because a lot of people had ribs, neck, back. They shouldn't have walked.
There were lots of cuts and scrapes, fractures and broken limbs, but nobody died. Tonight, 9 remain in hospital, only 1 in critical condition.
My heart goes out to the people who are injured, and I feel very lucky.
I never ever thought it would happen to me, but that's the way people think.
I'm here, I'm alive. Could have been worse, but why dwell on it?
They have questions. Why did it take so long for help to arrive? Why wasn't there an air traffic controller sitting in that tower? Tonight, though, the overwhelming feeling is relief that in spite of it all, they were able to walk away from the wreckage. Susan Harada, CBC News, Fredericton.
So lots of questions tonight about the crash. Questions, too, about cutbacks to air traffic control services and whether they may have contributed to the accident. The CBC's Sasha Petrusik has that story, starting with the view from the cockpit.
When it comes to air traffic control outside Canada's largest cities, Fredericton is not the exception, it is the rule. As journalist Bob Rankin gets ready to land his small plane in Gatineau, for instance, there is no control tower. He's the one who has to make sure it's safe.
I'm at 1,800 feet.
Even when the pilot of another plane that's landing tells Rankin he can't see him.
That's one of the things about an uncontrolled zone, is that there's a lot of responsibility on the pilots.
The only help on the ground comes from a similar flight service station to the one in Fredericton, providing some information but taking little responsibility for planes in the air and none at all once they land. That may be cheaper, but is it safe? Even the Transportation Safety Board admits having no control tower delayed helping the injured in Fredericton.
That's probably true, but economics being what they are, you can't always get what you want.
In fact, from Kamloops to Fredericton, 10 Canadian airports have lost their control towers over the past decade. 12 more are on the chopping block now that Ottawa has privatized air navigation. It's part of dramatic changes at Canada's airports aimed at reducing Ottawa's role and costs. Private passenger terminals, scaled back emergency services, computers instead of controllers. This consumer transport group says government cutbacks are creating an accident waiting to happen.
Quit giving us the baffle gab and lying to us that all these changes will not produce any problems with safety. They have, they are, and they will. And if they don't watch it, they'll have a 747 coming down in a Montreal suburb next.
They're wrong in terms of government cuts affecting air safety. And
Transport Minister David Collinette says there's no need for panic. He points to a steady drop in the number of air accidents over the past 10 years, even as flying gets more popular.
Air safety in Canada is good. We had an outstanding year last year, and up until the last couple of weeks, it was another very good year.
Up until 2 small planes collided over a Quebec airport that used to have control tower services, until 4 people died in Little Grand Rapids, Manitoba, until Fredericton. As for the government's cutbacks, it's not clear that they have resulted in either savings or safety. The federal auditor looked at the privatization of Canada's air traffic control system a couple of months ago. His report concluded that not only did Ottawa sell it for $1 billion less than it's worth, the government didn't even include measures to ensure that Transport Canada could continue to monitor safety.
Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, Ottawa.
And a couple of footnotes to today's accident. The type of plane involved, the CL-65, is built by Bombardier. It's been in service for about 5 years, and it's never been involved in a crash before. Worldwide, there are about 200 flying. And this from Air Canada tonight. The airline has offered each passenger on Flight 646 $5,000. It says the money is a gesture of concern and part of what it calls its overall care program. However, an official with Air Canada says not all the passengers have accepted the money. Still ahead in tonight's news.
3 years, they'll serve maybe a third of that sentence. What kind of a deterrent is that for killing your child?
A controversial sentence for the parents who let their baby daughter die. And school for scandal.
He had been convicted of hijacking.
Why was a terrorist living in the basement of this school?
On taking measurements and documenting marks on the runway, I just come over, had a quick look at the aircraft. I'm on my way back into the EEC to meet with Air Canada representatives and also contact my superiors in our head office.
People here will want to know more than just what happened last night. There are questions about why it took so long to get rescue gear aboard the plane and whether things might have gone smoother if there had been more people on duty when Air Canada 646 touched down. Neil Stairs, CBC News, Fredericton.
Last night, this runway was pitch black and covered with fog. At 11:47, radio contact was lost with Flight 646 coming in from Toronto. That's when the flight service specialist at the Fredericton Airport sounded the alarm.
He immediately called the area control center in Riverview to verify whether or not they were still in contact. When he found out they were not, he immediately called 911 to alert the city of Fredericton, and his next call was to the airport emergency services.
Jacques Chamberlain is with NAV Canada. Flight service specialists work for him. And like Transport Canada, he defends the emergency response.
Long time. We stood outside for a long time.
Passengers like Eric Simmons escaped by sliding down the airplane wing and waiting for help. Wayne Fagan says that's not good enough. Fagan's union represents airport workers, and he says government cutbacks to things like weather observers, air traffic controllers, and emergency firefighters is endangering people's lives.
I'm not sure if rescue is a priority.
Last night, there were only 2 firefighters on duty when the accident occurred, and if it had happened 10 minutes later, after midnight, there would have been none. Last week in this letter, Air Canada refused to pay overtime to keep emergency crews past their shifts, even if flights were delayed. And Transport Canada won't pay either.
When it comes to safety and security, we feel that the government should be putting the dollars, there.
Harry Gow of Transport 2000, a national lobby group for airline safety, agrees.
There's nothing like human eyes and human contact with what's going on. And that has been removed by the Crown, the Minister of Transport, and the Minister of Finance, Paul Martin. These people are to blame for this crash, as they are to blame for the other crashes previous.
Gow wants a public inquiry to find out whether public safety is being compromised by government budget cuts. Maite Ormachea, CBC News, Fredericton.
Survives a terrifying Air Canada crash.
The engines stayed at a high thrust.
Bruised and broken, the survivors wonder why the rescue took so long.
It seemed to last forever.
And the question of safety.
If they don't watch it, they'll have a 747 coming down in a Montreal suburb next.
It's safe. We're going to have one of the best systems in the world.
But are Canada's skies safe? Plus, Robert Jones on the controversial punishment given to the parents who let their baby die.
It's tough times now.
And Susan Bonner on the reverse gold rush and what it means for Canada.
The National with Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. Some walked away from the wreckage, others had to be pried from it. All are lucky to be alive tonight. 42 people were on a regularly scheduled commuter flight about this time last night. They took off from Toronto, their destination Fredericton. But when Air Canada Flight 646 finally came to rest, it was in a forest about a kilometer from Fredericton's airport terminal. An airport with no air traffic controllers and, according to some, ill-equipped to handle a disaster. We begin our coverage in Fredericton. Here's Cass Rusi.
Pieces of Flight 646 lay scattered on a snowy field at the Fredericton Airport. All day, a team of 15 investigators sifted through the area where the Air Canada jet carrying 42 passengers and crew crash-landed in heavy fog last night.
I'm surprised at how structurally sound that aircraft is. No big twisting, it didn't break in two. It looks like it's a very solidly built aircraft.
It was dark and the airport was shrouded in fog when the plane came in for a landing. The runway had just been sanded, but it was still slippery. The plane skidded off the runway, bouncing and moving wildly in an arc across a snowy field, losing its nose gear and landing gear along the way. It didn't stop until it slammed nose first into a thicket of trees and bush. Just to show you how far the airplane slid on its belly, that's the Fredericton Airport terminal. That's about 1 kilometer away. The plane slid up this snowy embankment to those trees. The impact of the crash was so great, a thick tree actually punctured the top of the aircraft, miraculously missing any passengers inside.
Shake our heads in amusement that there were no very serious injuries or death in this occurrence.
Eric Simmons was a passenger on the plane coming home for the holidays. He escaped by sliding down the aircraft's wing and waiting for help.
Well, we waited about 15 to 20 minutes. About 20.
Landed in Fredericton late Tuesday night, and some new insights into why it happened.
The latest information is that the pilot was trying to abort the landing, but when he started to pull up, the right wing hit the runway. Kaz Rusi has more.
Aviation investigators returned to the scene of the crash of Flight 646 today, continuing to search for clues. The chairman of the Transportation Safety Board, Benoit Bouchard, viewed the wreckage for the first time and was amazed no one on this flight was killed or more seriously hurt.
Nobody was killed. I mean, it's those who believe there's not God somewhere have news for that.
Inside the plane, graphic testimony of the heavy damage of the aircraft. A tree punctured the exterior of the plane. Some of the seats are ripped off the floor. The cockpit appears to be in good shape. More is known today about what happened moments before the Air Canada jet crashed as it approached the Fredericton Airport. Investigators have been able to analyze the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, which remained undamaged. They say there's no indication the aircraft malfunctioned as it tried to approach the airport runway. But Joe Jackson of the Transportation and Safety Board says it's clear the pilot had a change of heart.
A go-around was initiated just prior to intended touchdown, and this is sort of new information that we have. The crew very close to the ground initiated the go-around. We don't know why yet. Shortly after they initiated the go-around, and as in the application of power and rotating the aircraft did strike the runway.
It was a miracle that everyone survived Air Canada Flight 646. Still, the airline seemed anxious to disassociate itself from this kind of image. The airline's name and the corporate logo has been painted over. Cass Rusi, CBC News, Fredericton.
The Fredericton crash has raised questions about whether safety at Canada's small airports has been compromised by federal cutbacks. But visiting the island today, the federal transportation minister cautioned against jumping to conclusions. David Collinet was in Summerside today. He says the Transportation Safety Board should be allowed to complete its investigation of the causes of the crash before people make accusations. Others have criticized the apparent slowness of the response of rescue crews. This morning, New Brunswick Transport Minister Sheldon Lee said he wants rescue crews on standby every time a plane lands. Here in Charlottetown, a fire and rescue team is in place at the airport as long as scheduled commercial flights are coming in and out. If planes are delayed, airline companies must pay extra to keep the rescue team on duty. Air Atlantic does this, but Air Nova does not. Collinet says he'll review some of these procedures.
Well, certainly I'll be reviewing the whole, I guess, air safety issue internally and going over with my officials as to what has been done and why it's been done. I may know, but to go over it again, to reassure myself that everything that has been done has taken into account various eventualities. And any suggestions that people have will certainly be welcome. But certainly on the specific incidents that have occurred, we have to wait for the TSB. We cannot jump to conclusions.
Air Nova is now reconsidering its policy as well.
It wasn't airports that brought Collinet to the island. He was here to talk about seaports. He announced that he is giving the island some extra time to come up with a provincial port strategy. And he had some money to give away too. Ian Petrie with that story.
It's not a heavy export season in potatoes, but still, the ports of Charlottetown and Summerside are busy loading ships. The federal government has spent millions to build the facilities at these ports, and another $1.5 million a year to maintain them. But it now wants to get out of the business of running ports and turn them into private businesses called Canada Port Authorities. This puts PEI's 4 ports, including Surrey and Georgetown, at risk. Today, Transport Minister David Collinet gave PEI's ports some breathing room.
None of the ports here in Prince Edward Island, either individually or as a group, meet the criteria for CPA status. That's at the moment. Rather, they're identified as regional local ports.
There just isn't enough business at any of PEI's ports to make them self-sufficient now. But the alternative to this is for Ottawa to turn over ports to municipal or provincial governments.
You know, we were looking at the very real possibility of no more than 1 port originally.
PEI would be the only maritime province in Canada without a Canadian Port Authority. And we think at the federal level that's wrong. I mean, there's a unique situation here.
Collinet announced he's providing $5.6 million for Summerside and Charlottetown. It will be used for dredging and other repairs. As well, he's giving a local committee 2 years to come up with a business plan to make PEI's ports self-sufficient.
It gives us as an island community a fighting chance to put our ports in a position to face the challenges that we'll face as we see the turn of the century.
So we're very pleased with this announcement today, and I think the future of our port is much brighter as a result of this announcement.
The provincial government is also studying the future of PEI's ports. For his part, Premier Pat Binns was not very impressed with today's announcement.
Our objective is to maintain 4 strong ports in PEI and have the best possible facilities for moving goods in and out of this province. I don't think the federal government understands the necessity of maintaining these 4 ports, and I've got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that $2.6 and $3 million is not enough to meet that objective.
So the clock is ticking for PEI's ports. Everyone knows they're needed. The question is, will there ever be enough business for them to stand on their own? Ian Petrie.
It says that's one reason the corporate logo is now gone. It was painted over within 24 hours of the crash. The other reason is apparently standard practice.
We don't like to see people to see our aircraft in other than the pristine condition that they normally are. It's people are troubled when they see an aircraft that is not in perfect shape.
The makeover came as a surprise to the safety board, which controls the site, the evidence, and the investigation.
The painting was done, or just about done, when we arrived on the scene yesterday, and I don't know if there was or was not permission.
Another Air Canada surprise, the $5,000 it offered to everybody who was on Flight 646.
But this was just a gesture on our part.
A gesture, he says, not an attempt to avoid liability.
This was not related to formal compensation for the event. It was a gesture of Air Canada's sympathy to the particular circumstances they found themselves in.
Monique Dubé didn't quite know what to make of it. She was on the flight with her 3-month-old daughter.
I asked him point blank if by accepting the money to excuse them of any liability for the accident. There's no way.
She says that doesn't mean she thinks the airline is liable. She says Air Canada staff have given her tremendous support and help.
The co-pilot and the flight attendant and the crew of Air Canada went way beyond. From my opinion, they helped me and they went way beyond the call of duty to get me and the baby out of the plane.
But what about after they escaped the wreckage? Some other passengers say help took too long to arrive. What happened in the fog and confusion of that initial rescue effort is still under investigation. Today, another piece of that puzzle. 3 emergency medical technicians from the local hospital came forward to tell their story. They were among the second wave of rescuers called in that night.
When I got to the tarmac, I asked why we weren't proceeding in towards the aircraft, and the first ambulance crew that were there said that the fire department initially said that there was a fuel around the aircraft. They weren't sure how safe the scene was. And nobody told us we couldn't go to the aircraft, but nobody seemed to be proceeding forward.
They went on anyway and began helping trapped passengers. But as for questions about how the rest of the rescue effort was handled, the safety board says that's what the investigation is for. Susan Harada, CBC News, Fredericton.
9 people who were aboard Flight 646 remain in hospital tonight. At least one of them is in critical condition with broken legs. The hospital says several people could be released 2 nights since their commuter jet crash-landed in a forest near Fredericton Airport. Tonight we can tell you a lot more about how the plane got there, and we can take you inside, show you just how close some people came to tragedy. Once again, we begin with Cass Rusi in Fredericton.
The work continues on the wreckage of Flight 646. Investigators were back at it today, poking, prodding, checking the position of the cockpit, looking for clues into what happened here. And what happened here is nothing short of a miracle. 42 people survived this. From inside, you can see how the tree came right through the front of the plane, slicing through the first few rows, pinning some of the passengers. Some of the seats, too, were ripped from the floor. Benoit Bouchard, the chairman of the Transportation Safety Board, toured the crash site. When he emerged from the inside of the plane, he seemed amazed at what he saw.
Nobody was killed. I mean, those who believe there's not a guy somewhere have news for that.
Right.
In Ottawa, investigators pored over information from the aircraft's flight data and cockpit recorders, and have been able to piece together some of the moments prior to the crash. There's no indication the airplane malfunctioned, but it was foggy 2 nights ago when the Air Canada jet approached the airport's runway, traveling more than 200 kilometers an hour. The runway is about 2 kilometers long. As the plane comes in for the landing, the pilot realizes he's in trouble. When he's only 15 meters off the ground, a third of the way down the runway, the pilot decides to abort. He initiates what's called a go-around. As the aircraft increases speed and tries to gain altitude, its right wing strikes the runway. The plane then bounces for some distance before slamming into trees.
For some reason, they were not pleased with the approach, perhaps, and they commenced this approach because the captain figured, the pilot flying, we're not sure which, figured that it was not safe might not be the right word, but it was not prudent to continue with the landing attempt.
Carl Marat was a passenger on the plane.
And we're looking out, and all of a sudden the lights just kind of appeared out of this fog. And we were still going really fast, and I thought, man, this ain't gonna work. And then that's when we banked really severely to the right, and we did that, and we leveled off, and then we hit.
Investigators will continue to analyze data from the flight recorders and start the process of interviewing passengers and crew members. Above all, the pilot, who could answer the question, why did he abort the landing of Flight 646? Cass Rusi, CBC News, Fredericton.
There are still other lingering questions tonight, questions about what happened in the moments and hours after the crash landing. With that story, here's Susan Harada.
Once an airplane hits the ground like this, responsibility shifts, ownership changes. The Transportation Safety Board takes control of the site. Air Canada says insurance underwriters take ownership of what's left of the plane. It says that's one reason the corporate logo is now gone. It was painted over within 24 hours of the crash. The other reason is apparently standard practice.
We don't like to see people to see our aircraft in other than the pristine condition that they normally are. It's people are troubled when they see an aircraft that is not in perfect shape.
The makeover came as a surprise to the Safety Board. which controls the site, the evidence, and the investigation.
Yeah, the painting was done, or just about done, when we arrived on the scene yesterday, and I don't know if there was or was not permission given.
Another Air Canada surprise, the $5,000 it offered to everybody who was on Flight 646.
This was just a gesture on our part.
A gesture, he says, not an attempt to avoid liability.
This was not related to formal compensation for the event. It was a gesture of Air Canada's sympathy to the particular circumstances they found themselves in. Monique
Dubé didn't quite know what to make of it. She was on the flight with her 3-month-old daughter.
Asked him point blank if by accepting the money, just excuse them of any liability for the accident.
She says that doesn't mean she thinks the airline is liable. She says Air Canada staff has given her tremendous support and help.
The pilot and the flight attendant, the crew of Air Canada, went way beyond. From my opinion, they helped me and they went way beyond the call of duty to get me.
A jet that slid off a runway into a stand of trees is being interviewed by officials from the Transportation Safety Board. And there's other new information coming to light that could change the course of the investigation. Susan Harada explains.
The Transportation Safety Board investigation has already determined that as Flight 646 was coming in for a landing through dense fog, the pilot changed his mind. Investigators say he increased power and turned the plane to the right. The plane's right wingtip touched the ground, and that's what touched off the crash. Now, CBC News has learned that the plane was approaching the runway, apparently way to the left of the runway's center line.
The mark on the runway, rather, made by the right wingtip is about 27 feet left of the center line and about 1,800 feet from the threshold of the runway.
So what does all that say to you?
I guess that the aircraft, well, it's the first identifiable mark, so what we're assuming, that because there were no other marks, is that's where the aircraft first struck the runway, and it's fairly left of center line, but we haven't determined how far, because I haven't measured the aircraft yet to see how far left it was.
There are still questions also about whether the pilot decided to abort the landing because he was off-center. As for mechanical failure, at an earlier news conference, Joe Jackson said this.
The flight data recorder showed that there was no mechanical malfunction in the aircraft that we could discern from what we saw.
In the closing stages of the Safety Board's on-site investigation, the area is being prepared for the eventual removal of the wreckage. Scattered pieces will be gathered up and, along with the main body of the plane, will be kept in secure storage until the Safety Board decides it doesn't need it anymore. Susan Harada, CBC News, Fredericton.
The main courthouse in Montreal was evacuated earlier today after a man crashed his car through the front doors. Witnesses say the driver repeatedly backed up and rammed his way into the lobby. He was quickly arrested. The police cleared the building because they were afraid the car might be loaded with explosives. They were on edge because of the scheduled arraignment of the leader of a bike gang connected to the Hells Angels. More on that tonight from Mark Kelly.
Maurice Montboucher was paraded before the cameras after his arrest last night, the anti-biker squad's biggest bust in its battle against organized crime. Boucher is the leader of the Nomads. Police call them an elite squad of the Hells Angels responsible for drug trafficking. But police say Boucher was also responsible for the deaths of 2 prison guards. Last June, Diane Lavigne was gunned down behind the wheel of her car as she drove home after her shift. In September, Pierre Rondeau, a guard at a different provincial jail, was ambushed and killed as he drove this bus on his way to pick up prisoners. Police say the killings were aimed at destabilizing the judicial system.
To put pressure on the prison guards, put pressure on the court system, put pressure on everybody, on the police, saying, let us do whatever we have to do.
Police are hoping the arrest will destabilize the biker gang. The Hells Angels and the rival Rock Machine have been locked in a violent turf war for control of Montreal's illegal drug trade. More than 40 people have been killed in this battle over the past 3 years across the province. This breakthrough comes after 2 bikers, both recently arrested, provided police with information linking Boucher with the deaths of the 2 guards. Police are currently seeking 2 other men believed to be linked to the murders. And while the anti-biker squad has arrested hundreds of people over the last 3 years, it's been criticized for failing to hit the hierarchy of the gangs. Police believe the arrest of Boucher will change everything. Mark Kelly, CBC News, Montreal.
Canada's financial community got a fright today. The dollar dropped below 70 cents U.S. In fact, it came to within half a cent of its all-time low, set 11 years ago.
The man who survived the car crash that killed the Princess of Wales returned to Paris this morning. Trevor Rhys-Jones has been recuperating from his injuries in England. This morning he met with the judge who is investigating the accident. More on that from Paul Workman.
Trevor Rhys-Jones came back to Paris and walked into a media mob. He looked dazed and unsteady as security guards and police helped him enter the Paris Law Court. The trauma of the accident painfully visible. He's now been interviewed 3 times by French officials. His body is slowly healing, but not his memory. The 29-year-old bodyguard was in the front seat of Diana's Mercedes limousine. He remembers the hours before the crash and the days after, but not the most critical moments. The moment when Henri Paul, the chauffeur, shown here in a security videotape, entered the Alma tunnel, drunk, speeding, and trying to outrun a posse of photographers. Police believe the limousine may have grazed another car, a white Fiat Uno. But after checking thousands of vehicles around Paris, they've apparently given up the search. Rhys-Jones spent 2 hours at the courthouse. His lawyer said the interview went well, his client is doing much better, but did not want to make a statement. He also left by a different door to avoid another media gauntlet. France still has more than 20 inspectors working on the investigation, and 2 senior judges. For some here, that's excessive, indecent even, at a time when the Justice Ministry, they say, is facing budget problems.
It's only an accident, and we have a lot of policemen work on it, and it's only an accident.
Except she was a princess, the most popular woman in the world, and the French want a full accounting, just as the hundreds who come to the Alma Bridge every day want to see for themselves. A bodyguard who still can't remember, and a mysterious white car the police can't seem to find. Nearly 4 months after the accident, the investigation keeps coming back to the original tragic premise, that the Princess of Wales died under the most ordinary of circumstances, the victim of a drunken driver going recklessly fast. Paul Workman, CBC News, Paris.
Kennedy himself was later to sanction an abortive CIA plot to kill Cuba's Fidel Castro and a successful coup against South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem that led to Diem's assassination. There's a sense of guilt in Kennedy's voice as he muses about the assassination in a recorded memo.
I feel that we must bear a good deal of responsibility for it, beginning with our cable of early August in which we suggested the coup. I should not have given my consent to it without a roundtable conference.
There are also tapes of letters that Kennedy dictated to his wife Jackie when she was away on a trip.
Dearest Jackie,
While recent biographies have focused on JFK's many affairs with women such as Marilyn Monroe, these recordings reveal an affectionate husband and a proud father doting on his daughter Caroline.
I went up there last Friday afternoon, and Caroline looks beautiful. She evidently felt rather strange the first 3 or 4 days, but then has spread her charm out and seemed in great form when I saw her.
Kennedy lards the letter with gossip about friends and relatives, at one point revealing an anti-British streak as he dictates news about how 2 of his relatives are having a hard time in England.
It does show how bloody the British can be, but that comes as no surprise.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
But the idealistic side of Kennedy is apparent in many of the tapes, including this one where he's dictating his memoirs.
Paragraph: a successful politician today must have and communicate a sense of intelligence and integrity. I would say that, I've never regretted my choice of professions. come, even though the future today, even though I cannot know what the future will bring.
That observation that now sounds so oddly fatalistic was recorded shortly before the day so many Americans will never forget, the assassination of Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963.
We have the latest from Susan Haranda.
The on-site investigation of the crash of Flight 646 is winding down. Today, the 2 flight attendants on board when the plane went down were taken for a walkthrough of the wreckage. It was closure for them, going back to where it came to an end. Closure, too, for the examination of the wreckage itself. It has yielded about all the information it's going to. Within days, it will be pulled free of the tree that pins it down, put under lock and key in storage.
We got all the evidence virtually that we need from other sources than the aircraft itself.
Evidence from interviews with the crew and passengers, information also from the plane's flight recorder. The recorder helped investigators sketch a rough outline of what happened that night out on runway 15. Investigators know that as the plane came in fast and low for a landing in dense fog, the pilot changed his mind. As he turned right to abort the landing, the right wingtip struck the runway. Now, CBC News has learned that it hit about 8 meters to the left of the runway's center line. It raises questions about how far off center the plane came in and whether that played a part in the pilot's decision to abort.
What we're assuming, that because there were no other marks, is that's where the aircraft first struck the runway, and it's fairly left of center line, but we haven't determined how far, because I haven't measured the aircraft yet to see how far left it was.
They are also investigating the timeliness of the emergency rescue. Today, some gaps were filled in there, too. At 11:51 p.m., 3 minutes after the plane should have touched down, the airport's 2-member emergency team headed out. At about 12:10, after searching through thick fog, the plane's nose wheel was spotted beside the runway. At 12:18, 1 team member reached the crash site. More help began arriving, and by 12:49, an hour after the plane went down, a road was plowed to the site. The full rescue of trapped passengers was underway.
2 people that responded, and what they did in plowing roads and getting vehicles out there to the aircraft, I think, is fairly commendable.
But if there's no crew on duty, there's no emergency response available. And last night, just 48 hours after the crash, a troubling situation for the union representing airport firefighters. A flight came into Fredericton after midnight. The emergency crew's shift had already ended.
There was no firefighters, there were no trucks, there was no protection.
There was, according to Transport Canada, 1 crew member who stayed on his own time just in case. But it's Air Canada's responsibility to keep them there and pay the overtime. Air Canada says it's the pilot's responsibility to decide if that's necessary. Last night,